Hey guys, you may have noticed that whenever I try to experiment with Maya, it tends to crash. So I basically was playing around with the UVs in the last video, and Maya crashed on me. Unfortunately, such is life. So I went ahead and just reset my progress. I tried to do something fancy, like maybe stack the UVs in a different manner, but I decided just to leave them the way they are for my geometry. One thing I wanted to make sure to mention is that whenever you're doing these things before you export, you want to have your um, um, pivot to be at one of the sides, like wherever you think it'd be easiest to place this object as, and you want to make sure that basically your stuff is zeroed out. Okay, so you want to be freezing all your transforms once you do that, and you also, if you're done modeling, you might as well go ahead and delete your inputs and your history, which you don't really need to do. Maya will probably collapse them as you export them. You could always duplicate your stuff as well and export the duplicates if you really want to save your history. But at the end of the day, it's your prerogative. This is how I ended up. This is what I ended up letting it stay the way it was originally. We'll see what happens. My guess is that I'm not going to be too happy, especially if I start painting on this. But since I won't be painting on it, there's just so many things overlapping here. Obviously, I could always go ahead and do the same thing I did before and just unwrap the whole thing and just use this front side and the back side. But we'll see how it goes. All right, maybe we'll see how it goes. I'll just leave it as it is for now because it's always very simple to just add something very like if I can get something to tile, I'm not even gonna need to paint anything on it because you can see they're pretty, it's pretty well aligned together. You got UV1, 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 right? So if I get something to tile, I could get some really good results. Obviously, depending on the texture. This is not good UVing, by the way, so it's not very good UVing, but it'll get the job done for me. Okay, so next thing I'm going to basically hide this geometry because we're going to export this later. I wanted to show you something that I forgot to mention last time, and I actually forgot to record this. I thought I was recording, but I didn't when I was doing this. So I'm going to show this, basically explain this to you. Now, remember the root motion thing? Well, what you do is basically you unbind your skeleton, because right now we're done, right? I mean, I'm done with my animation. By the way, I recommend you. Look, I'll talk about the animation a little bit later. But anyway, whenever you are done, you just want to go ahead and create a root for a root joint called obviously root, and you want to put it in the zero. You want to zero it in, right? So put it at the origin of your world, and that's where your mesh should be as well. And then you're gonna have to unbind the skin from it because parenting the skinned skeleton to the brand new joint is not really gonna work. So you need to unbind this and then rebind it, and it should include it into the hierarchy. So if I go ahead and use my paint tool, you will see that my root is over here and has a 0 influences across the board of the vertices. So that's exactly what you want. What else is there to mention? Oh yeah, if you decide to scale this, now in my case this is a really bad, I only did this to show you something because in this situation look, my rig is not done in such a way that it will support scaling, okay? Because I did it very lazily, and I tried to be just to try something new again here. And as you can see, because I was using scale to drive my objects, that means that scale is one of the things I cannot actually use effectively. So if I go ahead and try to scale this, I could, but this also scales everything else, and this does create issues for me. But I can transform this quite easily, not from this side, but at least from left to right a little bit, a tad, a very little bit. Notice that I do get a deformation because I need to parent my locators to this, right? I need to parent. Basically, you want this to be your master driver, right? Or some people actually have two sets of controls. One is for transforms, right? The other one is for scales. But initially, essentially, what you do is basically you parent your root joint you parent constraint your root joint to this curve, and then you parent all your controls to this curve, including the IK handles and whatnot. So anything that controls your skeleton, you're going to parent this, not constrain it, parent it to your object, because in this case, you need to actually transfer a scale input. And unfortunately for us, Maya LT does not have a scale constraint, so you're going to have to parent them. And that way, when you scale it, it will actually, the scale will translate against all these other joints. One more thing as well is whenever you're scaling, you always want to go ahead and take a look at second joint, because you're going to be driving this from the root. But in the second joint, there is actually a thing called, oh boy, good luck finding that now. There's basically a thing called propagate scale, I believe it was called. So I'm really not sure where exactly it was. It's not in the limit anyway. Maybe it's in the extra attributes. No. Node behavior, actually. Maybe that. No. Unfortunately, it's not here. So I'm not going to go through all of these, just to find the thing. It's somewhere in the attribute editor. I'm just not sure where it was. But it basically says, oh, I got 2 skin clusters here. Imagine that. Probably should delete one of them. But essentially what it does is it propagates the scale channel across all your objects. I don't even know if Maya LT maybe this is just a Maya thing. Propagate scale. No, I'm not seeing it. Inherits transform. Oh, right, sorry. Segment scale compensate. There you go. So if you turn this off, if you don't get the desired results. Now in this case, obviously, there's nothing that can happen. But actually, there we go. It's actually scaling it up and down. So there's this. So it works from this situation, but it's not really going to work that well from this perspective because, like I said, we're scaling the controls. I'm not a big fan of this because it requires, like, if you're going to do this, it means you're going to scale your, it means you're going to drive the scale through your root, which is entirely possible. It's a legit way of doing this, but this means that your root needs to be parented to your control, unless, of course, you just want to select your root every time you want to scale it, which is a legitimate way of doing stuff, right? You can always go ahead and just go into the outline and select your root and just scale your root. And if you if you have the scale propagations, then it will actually work quite okay. But then again, you won't have the control, so you need the central control anyway. All right, at some point. Right. Let's see, what else do we have here. Nothing really. It's about time we export this stuff. So make sure to unbind your skin and then rebind it with this at 0. Okay, make sure to add it to the parent, to the hierarchy, and call it root or whatever you want to call it. So now we're going to export this stuff. Now, in order to export, I've already done this before, so I've set up an Unreal project, but you want to go ahead and essentially set up your Unreal project where your FBX files will be done. So in this case, we would go ahead and look into my computer. I believe it was in game development, Titspace, Worm, Volleyball. This was our project. So now every time I say, okay, so let's go ahead and export something, it's going to send it over to that folder, ready for import into Unreal Engine 4. But that's not the case in this, because we're going to be using the exports from here, which will go into Unreal Engine's folders. Import will actually go ahead and load it into Substance Painter, paint our stuff there, and then import from Painter into Unreal, back into Unreal. So we're going to have 2 sets of imports, one from Maya and one from Substance. But anyway, at this stage, we just want to export the stuff and see how it looks like. So go ahead and select your object. Actually, it's best if you do so from the outliner. So select your root and go ahead and select the whole hierarchy. And then obviously go ahead and select your mesh over here. There's one thing that you need to notice is the fact that if you go ahead and expand this hierarchy completely, you will notice that you do have selections that we don't need. So we don't need the effectors, we don't need our constraints, we don't need these curves. All these things would, they're not required, so we don't really need them. There's one more thing here, is the fact that once you export this, we're only going to export the mesh. Remember, we don't need the animations just yet, because we want to have a modular approach. Now, obviously, for such a small project like this, you don't need to do this. This is overkill. We only have 2 animations anyway, so segregating them is not really going to benefit us very much. But it's a good habit to get into, because even though it's a little bit more annoying to set up, it is actually a lot faster to work with, because your clips or your animation presets or animation I don't know, clips. Yeah, well, basically your animation is separate from your object, meaning that I can, even though, right, even though I'm gonna make a game with this worm, I could reuse this worm in another game, and maybe I can have other types of animations on it. But as long as I have this skeleton, meaning that if I have some other animation onto the skeleton, I can just load it onto whatever it is I'm doing here. Okay. So what I'm going to do now is essentially export only this without any animation, any of these things, no jazz, no nothing, right? What we want is a bound skin. So a skeleton, a mesh, and that's it, nothing else. So go into File and say, I'm not going to use the game exporter because this is useful for your animations, which we're not going to export yet. So I'm going to send this to Unreal. And I've set the project already. I'm going to export my selection. And let's go ahead through these menus. Now, before you do this, always check the U4FBX pipeline. This will give you the current, depending obviously on the version of Unreal Engine that you're using. Always check which FBX you're going to be using for the export, because this FBX, if you use an older or a newer version, you might get issues with your imports. All right, so make sure to use the correct FBX file, FBX version for the exports and communication between UE4 and Maya. Anyway, you can obviously use this. You can use that page for just for general stuff. Like, actually, I shouldn't have closed this, because if you ever set up some colliders, in Maya, if you want to do so in Maya, some custom shaped colliders like these, you're going to need to figure out which prefixes you need, and obviously these are written over here. So if you have something like that's a good example here. If you have like a stop sign or a lollipop or whatever, and you don't want to have some very complicated collider, which you can certainly set it in Unreal, but if you want to do so in Maya, you have to define your meshes. You need to create a mesh which is going to act as a collider. So in this case, as you can see here, there's a good example of how a collider should look versus the actual shape of an object, because nothing's going to go through this, right? Anyway, that's a little bit going into collision and all that jazz. We're going to talk about collision later when we get into Unreal. But just to be sure, just make sure that if you know what you're doing, if you want to talk about collision and all that, make sure to do so here. Now here I'm having a little bit of an issue because it says FBX version plugin 2017, but I want to use FBX file format. I'm going to use, so there's no only 2016, you only get 2016, 2017, so I'm just going to use 2016, see what happens. We're going to use a binary type here, but let's, first things first, let's go from the top. Now, first and foremost, because this is an FBX, we're not going to get any option inclusions, which, it's fine. Then we can go to presets. If you have several different presets, you can have your own presets, definitely, which we probably should make for Unreal Engine 4 specifically. But because we'll only be working with UE4, we probably won't need to create more than one. But anyway, I'm just going to go over these real quick. So let's see what we're going to include. The include is basically anything that's going to be exporter, right? Essentially, it says what do you want to add from whatever you've selected. So let's go ahead and see what we've got. First, geometry. Smoothing groups, we should enable those, because smoothing groups basically are what we did when I was defining hard and soft edges. So these the creases and all that, I believe the creases are also part of the smoothing groups, so we need to include that. When we split pre-vertex normals, this has nothing to do with us. This is basically for something called Motion Builder, which I've never used in my life and probably won't. And this is only for the old version of Motion Builder. So if you ever look, if you need to check this, you're probably in the wrong video series. The tangents and binormals, you don't want to calculate those because we're going to be doing so through Substance, and this is not going to do that correctly anyway. And then we go into smooth mesh, which is what you want. You want to smooth your mesh. You definitely want to triangulate it, and you don't want to reference any assets or content, because we don't have any referenced assets in here, right? Everything is within the object, and even if it is, we want to make sure that it turns into an object, because Unreal is not going to go ahead and reference some crazy object on the other side of the hard drive, like a stop sign or whatever, just because we didn't tick this. So we're gonna do this. We're not gonna include any selection sets because we don't have any selection sets. We just want to export a clean mesh. We don't have any NURBS here, but if we did, obviously you'd have to go ahead and change it, convert the surfaces to whatever. We don't need any animation in this stage, so that's all. We're gonna go click this. Don't need any cameras, don't need any lights. No media. Embedding media basically means that if you got any texture maps or any audio files or any of that jazz is going to be embedded in the FBX, and we don't. And even if we did, we're going to do our texturing through Painter. So look, anything that includes textures, just forget about it from Maya. Because look, me personally, I don't like Maya for texturing. I think it's a disaster. I think Painter is a much better option. After that, we've got the connections. Include children in input connections. Well, we don't need any of that. So actually, now that I think about it, input connections do count as input connections count. The skin cluster is an input. I don't know. Let's leave it off and see what happens. If obviously if we don't get our skin deformations, then we don't. We're gonna basically leave this off. And let's go into advanced options, see what else we've got. Units. Our scale factor is 1.0, and we're going to keep it that way because we've set up our units to be in Maya centimeters, the same as the units in Unreal Engine 4. So we don't need to change our scale factor. Okay, no need to change the size of our object. The axis conversion. Our up axis is actually Z, so we need to make sure that you don't accidentally. In this case, right, if you haven't set up your axis to be Y, obviously make sure to either convert it upon export or just set it up as it is, and then make sure not to convert it back to Y once you export. It's very important because it's going to screw up your orientation. Then you've got the UI is basically what you're going to get after you export, and then the FBX file format, which is a binary instead of an ASCII, which is a more, I believe, I don't know what ASCII is, text-based stuff. Just keep it at binary, all right? So let's go ahead and capture a thumbnail so that we can identify with this. Yeah, let's save it. So let's go ahead and grab ourselves a picture. There we go. This looks pretty nice. Should I maybe... Oh, I can't actually do that. Whatever. So I'm going to capture this as it is right now. Probably not the best capture because I got all this selected. So capture this, save it, and now we have a thumbnail as well as our object. And go ahead and we go export this as worm_low. All right, and export this selection. Nothing else to be done here. We have everything set up. Export the selection, and let's see what happens. I'm going to say the constraint exports failed, which is fine because we don't need any constraints. And now I'm going to go ahead and open a new scene so we can import this and see what we've done. I'm going to go ahead and import this. And let's take a look at what we have here. Definitely do miss something, which are our joints. Oh, there we are. There are our joints. So let's see if we have our deformation done. Let's go ahead and grab these two. Yes, our object deforms correctly. Definitely, not the worst thing in the world, but for some reason we do have these things here which we do not need. They don't in any way impact with our object. So I may have missed something on the input connection. So actually, how did this even happen? Because now that I think about it, I unchecked every single tick. Every box was unchecked. So how is this actually relevant is beyond me, and we should go ahead and delete these two curves because we don't need them. I believe I unchecked them when I was exporting this, but whatever. So now we have this, we could, for example, go ahead, and I even exported the layers. I don't remember ever exporting the layers. The inputs, layers are counted as inputs, but damn. I was not aware that it will export all these things as well. Oh, geez. Okay, so our geometry has been triangulated, but it does not look anywhere near as good as it should be. Unfortunately, as you can see here, we do have some issues. Now we're going to have to go ahead and clean this up afterwards, okay? But for now, let's just go ahead and forget about this because I don't have the time to clean this up as it is. Plus, because we still haven't actually seen how this will look like in Unreal Engine 4, let's now go ahead and you know, do something drastic. For some reason, when I triangulated this, the hardened mesh, the creased mesh, okay, the creased mesh, for some reason got set up here. Oh, sorry, there we go. I was actually in the smooth preview. That's why it was an issue, because this is what happens when you smooth a triangulated mesh. Otherwise, this is how it looks like. Now, for some reasons, though, I still don't like the fact that somehow my my creased mesh actually, my creased what's its face, my creased edge somehow ended up on top of my geometry, and that's not something that I enjoy. So I look, depending on what you do, in my case I probably will be better off triangulating this in my project folder, obviously creating a duplicate before that, and see what happens right at that point, so that I can possibly clean this up. Or I could clean this up right now. For example, I could go ahead and see if I could where is it, where's the cleanup? There's somewhere to clean up here. Yeah, you can all go ahead and clean this up and see where, like, you can clean up different polygons and, you know, all these things, like edges with zero length. And I think there was a way to actually go ahead and clean up from not sure. Well, it's always possible. Just select the whole thing and, you know, set up my edges to be so if I go ahead and go into edge mode now, go into edges, and then no, and then I let's say I go ahead and soften these edges, so these are all soft, and I go ahead and crease, go into my crease tool and just uncrease them. For some reason these are not creased, so let's see what's gonna happen if I check this thing. My inputs actually does not really give me that much to work with. I have to check this out. I actually haven't really had an issue like this before, where my creases just went all over the place. This might not even have a particular impact, because if I can't actually even see right now because I don't deform this object, but we'll see once I export the animation. Now after this, obviously it's time to export the animation. Notice that I softened these schmucks at 180, so I want to go ahead and select this. Yeah, now that we can't actually even select an edge ring because we don't have any polygons. That's annoying, quite annoying indeed. I have to check what the story is. Maybe there was some issue. Maybe I should have triangulated, obviously, inside my object before I exported this. But that's the general idea. That's how how exporting works in Maya. After that, obviously, we would go ahead and open this previous scene, which was just where we were. Where is my where are my scenes? What happened? File. Open scene. Where's my recent scene? Oh, there we go. Scenes. I'm going to use the incremented one over here. So if we go ahead and take a look about animation, by the way, I wanted to do that as well. Before we export each clip separately, the way I already showed you from the time editor over here, or from the graph editor, or from whatever, we got the basically the game exporter, which is what we want, if I can find it. Time editor, game exporter. There we go. You just either click here, or you go ahead and go into game exporter, and this will give you all these things, and just grab your animation clips, and then you select your object, obviously, export selection. Ideally, you'd want to bake this stuff, but I do think this will bake it for you. But you obviously use this game exporter thing. Now we've already done this. I've already showed you how to export animation in the animation section of these videos. I just wanted to make sure that you check that your animation is all complete. In other words, go ahead on YouTube and see all the principles of animation, because basically there's stuff like, you know, whatever starts moving first is going to be the last to stop moving. Sorry, whatever starts movement last is the last thing to stop its movement. things like this to create more organic animation. Now this is very rigid as hell. Ideally I'd probably spend a whole day, because I'm not a very good animator. I'd probably spend quite a while setting up these, not to mention that my rig looks like crap, and I would have to maybe go ahead and I don't know, maybe create a deformer here, right? A nonlinear deformer with a bend. And I need to, oh, actually, I need to go ahead and select my my skeleton first, and then go, for example, over here, which is my jump. Let's say this is my jump. Notice that I did this just to make sure there's some kind of organic movement here, but this is not good at all. So I could go ahead and grab a deformer and create a bend deformer, for example, right? Maybe I should have, you know, changed the axis of it, but let's go ahead and rotate this. Let me just see what the curvature is, which way it goes. So I'm going to rotate this across the Z, no, across the Y axis, no, across the X axis. Yeah, so 180. Oh, no, no, no. We want this to be, I want this to be 0. I want this to be 90. No, I want this to be 0. And we want to rotate across our Z-axis, I believe, then. No, okay, it is the Y-axis. Yeah, there we go. So it's going to be 90 degrees on the plus, and then obviously this is a little bit too extreme, so I probably lift this up a little bit over here from the top and reduce my curvature. Please. What's the story here now? Oh Jesus, sorry, it was on this side. So I would reduce my curvature and try to get something that is sort of acceptable, right? And play around with this. So maybe you can grab the low bound, high bound 0.5, something like this, right? And then maybe reduce my envelope a little bit by 0.3. And then once I key this in, maybe this would create a good enough. Oh no, actually it doesn't, as you can see. Oh, it does. There we go. So it sort of creates an interesting solution. Obviously, I could just drag this envelope to 0, see how it all looks like. Here I do have something that I'm not very happy with. So I spent quite a while actually here trying to achieve a particular, because I'm going right under the object. But remember that I'm going to be jumping up, which is fine because I'm going to be having my root actually moving this upwards. So even though I have my animation doing this and going under my plane, notice by the way that my envelope, I probably have to key this in as well just to see how it's gonna work, because obviously at 0 it's not gonna work much, but when I envelope this I will get a curve on my neutral position over here. So really, basically you need to spend some time playing around with this. Okay, I'm gonna delete this. But what I wanted to say is the fact that just because something goes through, whenever you're animating, make sure that to think how your game is going to play. Just because I have my appendages here, my extremities going through the world, which would be, this would be the surface, right? First of all, it would happen so fast that probably nobody will see these few pixels that go through. And second of all, I'm going to play this as I launch my object into the air. So by the time these few frames happen, right? By the time these few frames happen, it's gonna be you know, it's gonna be it's already gonna be in the air, so you're not gonna see this. You're not gonna see it going through the you know, the ground here. So whenever you're animating, make sure that you try to make it look as organic as possible. Check out the YouTube video for animation principles of animation. You know, play around with these, basically spend some time getting it to look very organic. I'm probably gonna just leave it as it is right now, because we can always go ahead, and I want to do this. I want to basically have some errors, some problems here, so that we can go ahead and release a patch for our game afterwards, where we're going to sort out these issues with animations and topology and whatnot. So this is going to be our version 1.0, which we're going to release onto Steam. And we're going to patch after that immediately. So I just want to show you how patching works. And then we're going to release a small DLC, which will also add some stuff, you know, like, I don't know, exploding balls, whatever, arcade mode, whatever. We'll see what's going to happen. But I just want to have, in general, something left to work on. And look, it's never, by the way, finished. So make sure not to spend like a week working on your animation. I mean, yeah, you can keep polishing it, but you'll never be satisfied. There's always going to be something you could change. So there's that. Anyway, now that we have this, basically you want to export your animation separately and not the object. So you're not going to go ahead and export the whole thing. That's not what you want. So basically grab your object, right? Well, in this case, your controls, right? And you can, well, actually in this case, your object, like here, because we only need the skeleton in this case, by the way. We don't need the mesh anymore. We're done with the mesh. So make sure to understand that whenever you export this, you're only going to export the data, the skeleton data, and the info and the animation with it. That's why we actually exported the mesh prior to this, so that you have the skeleton with the mesh being available to you, and then any type of movement data that you have import there is going to be inherited and be applied to this skeleton. So basically that's the only thing that you're exporting, the skeleton itself, and only the skeleton. So make sure not to grab any of that other jazz. If I go ahead and select the hierarchy, we don't need these curves, we don't need these over here things. So make sure to only select the stuff that is going to be animated. No effectors, none of that jazz. Okay, you're only going to be animating your your skeleton, and that's the only thing we exported, and we only the only thing we're going to import into our engine once we have whatever we need. So you go into your game exporter, right, and you've got your animation clips, and you're going to start, let's say, at a particular clip, and say it starts from 0 to, I don't know, was it 15, right? So you're going to start from 0 to 15. And let's play this from 0 to 15, right? And then you're going to create a new one, and you're going to call it from 15. No, from when did it begin? 20, was it? 20. Yeah, 25 till 40. So from 25 till 40. And now if we play this, we should have our jump. So this is our jump animation. And now we can actually name these and say, well, this is our crawl. No, this is our walk cycle. Stop moving. Walk cycle, I suppose. And then this is our jump, right? And then when you go into your settings over here, you're gonna say, okay, save to multiple clip files. We don't need to move to origin because we are at our origin. You want to bake the animation. Up axis is Z. You don't need any of these input connections, binary, all that jazz. You choose the path, right? In this case, it's gonna be, let's say, I don't know. Let's use. Well, technically, we should choose the path, which is our Unreal Engine thing. And annoyingly, I don't have a bookmark for it, so I'm gonna have to go and look for it again, which would be my computer. This, Titspace, Worms, Volleyball, import, and I'm gonna create a new folder called Animations. I'm gonna enter, I'm gonna select this. I wonder if I can bookmark this. How do I bookmark these? What is that? As list view, what is that? What's it do? No idea. How do I bookmark this damn thing? Well, this is quite annoying. All right, never mind. So we'll use this directory. I'm going to choose this. So currently it's in animations, and I'm going to say worm. This is my prefix. I'm going to export. This is going to bake this stuff in. Export successful, and we are done. As you can see, it's all nice and dandy here. Everything should be in order. So if I go ahead, and I really need to change the profile. Freaking hell. And now we can go ahead and open a new one, open a new scene. We need to create a new scene. And we need to import our object. So I'm going to go ahead and import my, oh, for crying out loud, are you seriously that annoying now? All right, look guys, I'm kind of running low on time actually. So, I believe you understand how this whole thing works, okay? So go ahead and export your animation, import it in, see how it works. Obviously, you need to go ahead and have your FBX imported, right? And then we're gonna import your animation. I'm gonna have like an overall Maya lockdown in the next video. So next video we will actually go ahead and finish up with Maya and prepare to go into Substance Painter. So one more video, guys, and Maya is over, which is good news for me because I'm starting to get tired of Maya. Actually, I'm starting to get tired of talking about Maya, because every time I seem to try to do something with it, it decides to, retaliate against my efforts. Not to mention the fact that I'm not a specialist in Maya, okay? And even specialists probably run into these issues. All right, guys, I'll see you next time when we finally finish up with this whole story, go through the whole pipeline. It's going to be like a longish video because I want to go through all the pipeline here and just take a look at our final result before we go ahead and dive into Substance Painter and just take a look at how all of this is going to look in Unreal Engine 4. Just preliminary examination of what we've done so far so we know what we're doing right and if we're doing anything wrong at all right? Okay, I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.